Welcome to our little session about scare attractions. Who's into scaring people? Ooh, nice. So, welcome to Horror and Trojan Horses, and you're all gonna see what that's about very soon. Let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Michael Badelt. I'm from Germany, if you haven't noticed already by my accent. I work in the theme park industry for around 24 years now, and my main focus is haunted houses, scare attractions, immersive theater, show control. And my original background is in IT and media production. So how did I get here? I don't know. It just happened. So what we're going to talk about today is, and I already apologize for the people in the back. You have a different monitor over there, because I'm using a lot of text on my slides. I am going to talk through all of it, and it's going to be a very jam-packed session. There's a lot to go through in 30 minutes. There hopefully will be some room for questions at the end. If not, there's lunch, and there's me. So just come up to me, say hi, and we'll talk. So what this is, we're going to look at our journey with one particular attraction that we worked on for 4 years. It's been a while ago, but it's still very relevant to what we're doing today when we're designing scare attractions. When I say we, that's me and my team. We work for different theme parks, mostly small to medium size, and we work together with the theme park collaboratively. So we check, so what skills do you already have in-house? And then we come in and fill in the blanks. And that could be just me as a freelancer, or with a team of sometimes up to 20 people working on a project. So then we're also going to talk briefly about a little background on fear and what fear actually is. And we're going to look back at the attraction, what we had planned, and what we have learned, because this really is a session about making mistakes. We don't spend nearly enough time talking about making mistakes and how we learn from them. And it's one thing to make a mistake. It happens. Mishaps happen. But it's a totally different thing not learning from them. So let's dive back into our story, which I'm going to tell you about today. It's a story about an attraction called The Hotel. Why the hotel? Well, for some reason, hotel theming seems to work really well in scare attractions. They kind of lend itself to social observation and creepy characters, strange characters, weird things going on. But before we talk about the hotel, you need to understand where the attraction originally came from, which is an attraction called Demon Extreme. Now, Demon Extreme was back in 2015, and it was aimed at going a more extreme way. So it was sort of an extreme scare attraction. Not really. We had a fine red line that we didn't want to cross. It was 6 scenes. It was a linear walkthrough. It was not the biggest attraction, like 240 square meters roughly. And each scene was deliberately designed to trigger at least 3 phobias, very common phobias, because we wanted to get to everyone at least once throughout the attraction. There were interactive elements, so like blindfolding and restraining, tactile effects, whatnot. And touching was also an integral part of the attraction, but not in a way to scare people. So we were not doing the, oof, hey, you, out of the dark. No, it was there to guide people, to deliberately place people in spots where they should be. We had a little gimmick, which was a remotely controlled torch. Every guest would get one. And what they didn't know initially was that we were controlling the torches. So we can make it light up every color we wanted. We could make it sync to the soundtrack. And it could also vibrate, which is quite unusual for a torch. And it was designed to be experienced completely alone. You could take someone with you, but that was optional. That's where that came from. Coming back to the notion of touching, it's very frowned upon in scare attractions, in startle scare attractions, for good reasons. In this case, it was necessary. So what did we learn from that? We were hugely successful, not gonna lie. We always sold out, which is easy if you think about the low capacity. But still, it was very successful. People had great things to say about the attraction. And it was more of a personal experience than just a haunted house. Also, it justified the premium ticket price. If you go into a theme park and you've already paid like 30, 40 quid for the entrance fee, paying another 10 to 12 for just one attraction is asking a lot. It did work, though. The downs, what did we learn as well? We accidentally created a serial exposure therapy session because some people really felt triggered, and we had some really strange encounters at the exit. Some very funny, some very strange. So we thought, okay, this is probably the limit that we can go to, that we can reach at a family theme park. So there was no more going beyond that. We couldn't go any further. Another problem that we encountered was that people were getting the narrative, the underlying themes, the phobias, but the story was like a blank, which wasn't that big of a deal, but yet we would have loved for it to be the other way around. Which brings us to the hotel, which had a little side effect at the end. And it was not designed to be like that in the beginning, because the idea was, let's make it more family friendly again. And then we needed to conform it to our new storyline for the event. Like Demon Extreme existed for 2 years, then we changed the storyline for the whole event, and we wanted the attraction to fit into the new storyline, which was set in a Western American town like 150 to 200 years ago. We wanted it to be more of a storytelling thing, like people gather around the fireplace, we're going to tell you a spooky tale. That was the idea. We wanted it to be more like immersive theater, and we wanted it to be interactive. A haunted house with escape room elements. That was the idea initially. We wanted to have a higher capacity, and we didn't have all that much of a budget to begin with. So we took an existing shell of an attraction and rethemed it. So this is how it started. We had groups of 2. Sometimes we would split the group. It was, again, a linear flow. We added one more scene. It was now 7, and it lasted for about 13 to 14 minutes, roughly. It was even smaller in size, like 220 square meters. And we had an evolving storyline that had some limited branching in there. The narrative, however, was touching a lot on social issues like vanity, aging, and compassion, honesty. That was important to us, that we wanted to give it some meaning. Again, touch was only used if required to place people in the right spots. We had some jump scares in there because, hey, why not? And we had like 2.5 puzzles in there, which is going to be quite important as we go on. And this is how that looked. So you can see if you can all see that, not sure. So in block 1, that would be the lobby where everybody would be entering. And you were being given an introductory speech by the porter, which would set the mood and make you familiar with the ground rules of how to interact in the hotel, and that you can not touch the actors unless they touch you. So, and also the very common rule of don't speak unless spoken to, which happened quite a bit then. And this layout conforms to the idea of triangular grid design in a haunted attraction, which is used to maximize length, walk-through length, if you have a limited space. And it's also designed to completely disorient you. And and the end was a little parlor trick. We had a room where the audience was in with a huge mirror that wasn't a mirror. It was a glass, and the room was mirrored on the other side. That's what you can see on the bottom left. You have like 2 identical rooms, because the idea was you're standing in front of a mirror and you no longer have a mirror image, which also did work remarkably well, which we didn't think, but people were asking us, how did you do that? Did you use projection? No. It's really that simple, like, just. So, on for something completely different, which plays a role later. Fear. What is fear actually? What does it do? Let's jump back in time quite a bit. So where does fear come from? It still comes from the Stone Ages. We may think of ourselves as a very evolved species, yet we are still very much rooted in the Stone Ages. Where was this useful? Fight versus flight. Do I decide to fight the woolly mammoth, or do I want to eat it? It's the decision that we need to make. Obviously, in a scare attraction, which one do we want? Any ideas? Flight, exactly. Because fight would result in lawsuits. Another question. Can we be afraid and angry at the same time? Show of hands. Who says yes? Who says no? No is right. We can switch between the 2 states in an instant. It can be a split second, but once you've made the decision, do I want to fight? Do I want to be angry? Or do I want to take my legs and run? That decision is made. You can reverse that decision if the situation changes. But once you've made one or the other decision, you're stuck with that for a while. And then you make a new decision. But it's not possible at the same moment to feel both emotions. So why is fear useful? It kept us alive until now, because it forced us to make these kinds of decisions. Spoiler alert. What if I told you you're not afraid of being alone in the dark? You're afraid of not being alone in the dark. So, how many fears are we born with? Actually, just 2. Not that much. The fear of sudden loud noises and the fear of falling, which is the one fear that helps us to actually walk, because we don't want to fall down. So it forces us to practice. There are some more examples of fears that we learn if we grow, and hopefully we do. And also fears that are induced to us by society. The color red is currently being debated because it's not necessarily a fear, but it seems to be a genetic predisposition that red is a sign of danger, which is currently being discussed by people who are way more clever than me. And Fire, interestingly, is something that you need to learn. Like kids touching on the hot oven plate, you do that once, and then you know. Large teeth, spider. Who's afraid of clowns? No one. One. That was one hand. Nice. Our brain really functions on bias and expectation. We expect something, and if that expectation is then messed with, we'll tend to find that scary. How does it work? It doesn't just exist in our heads. Fear lives in our heads and in our body. It's felt mentally and physically. We also get used to a certain state, like we can get used to stress, we can get used to fear, and then we need a delta. And if we want to use it in an attraction, we need to modulate that delta. We need to lower the tension or rise or make it rise. That's the two things that are usually done. And it's a two-way communication. Our body can influence what our mind comes up with, but also our mind can influence how our body reacts. That is called therapy. And why is this fun? Well, let's just look around. The world is, for us, mostly void of natural predators, apart from politicians. Yet we still long for that kick every once in a while, which is why extreme sports are so popular these days. But overcoming fear and anxiety it's really a good thing because it gives us a sense of achievement. We like to accomplish something. We want to master our fears. And sometimes even the process can be fun. I'm not saying that a scare attraction is a good therapy, but for some it actually is. Like, most of my characters that I work with, well, not most, but a lot, would never go through their attraction, their own attraction that they work in, if it's in normal show mode, because they are deadly afraid of that. Yet working on the other side is totally fine. Let that sink in for a moment. Facing our fears can make us grow as a person, which comes up to the question why it makes us feel good. Because everybody of you, me, we're drug dealers. Our bodies are drug dealers. Fear really is chemistry. Our own drugs include adrenaline, serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin, and endorphins. I hope you can read it. This is just a very brief overview. There's so much more I could tell you about each and every one of these hormones that are being released depending on how we trigger them. We can make people feel compassionate. We can make them feel loved. We can make them feel wanted, or the opposite, rejected, hated. All the positive and negative emotions that you can come up with will trigger one of these hormone releases and neurotransmitter releases. And if you know how to get around with these, you can actually use that to your advantage. In a normal scare attraction, and don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with that at all. But in a normal scare attraction, which builds on startle scares, we usually have these sawtooth patterns. We have a big impact in the beginning, we have a big impact in the ending, and one right in the middle. Why? Because these are the moments that people will remember. And in the middle, you have this thing in between. That doesn't mean that it's not important. It's just that it is sadly not remembered by everyone. Some people will, yeah, which is why it's important to also take care about these things. But you usually ramp up the tension, then there's a big scare, and then it falls off. And that triggers a hormonal release. Now, if you remember about the different emotional responses that we can trigger in our body, we can modify this pattern to something like this, which will give you intentional deltas in emotional responses in order to distract people. You can really make someone feel wanted and loved, because that makes that person be distracted. And then, because a distracted person for us, when scaring people, is a good person, someone who's distracted, I can scare the shit out of them. And that's what we're all here for. That's why people pay money for that. And if you look at it that way, it's almost like playing the hormone piano. Hit the right note in the right moment, give them an emotional delta, make them remember emotionally. So you use fear and to create tension and guide your audience through the experience. You play the hormone piano, but choose your weapons wisely, which is you need to be really careful not to overdo it. But modulate an emotional response in an attraction, and you'll get much more out of the reaction of your guests than you probably would have expected. Fear and strong emotions will make your attraction be remembered more vividly than if you're just telling a story. That is your tool set when you're designing an attraction. And that is a tool set we didn't come up with, it just happened. So back to our regular scheduled program. What did we learn from the hotel? So the good news is it worked, but the response wasn't stellar. People were not really paying attention enough to properly interact, and the story branches didn't feel as satisfying as we had hoped. We realized that our marketing was wrong. Because apparently, in theme park goers, it may be different elsewhere, but in theme park goers, if you tell them you're gonna, you'll be scared and will distract you with puzzles, that doesn't work. In an escape room setting, if you tell them you're gonna solve puzzles and will try to distract you with scares, that seems to work. So the thesis is you can have the same attraction, marketed from two different angles, and you get two different audiences, which is interesting. We didn't expect that to happen. So we made a version 1.5 a year later. The puzzles were now really guided by the actors, like really guided. Like, touch this, put this here, for dummies, really. We added one more jump scare, because hell, why not? We made the script easier to follow, and we changed the marketing of the attraction because we now build it as an interactive scare maze. Our thinking was, let's make it easier to fulfill what our audience wanted, their expectation. So, yeah, no, it still wasn't working, which was a bit sad, but the learnings were, it didn't improve. It stayed on the same level in the reception with the audience. Some people outright refused to solve the puzzles. They were like really like this. No, not doing it. No, not doing it. No, you're just gonna scare me. No. Most likely reason A, they were afraid of having a jump scare, or B, that they were embarrassed themselves in getting it wrong in front of someone they did not know. You can choose either one. And the story did not stick. It just didn't. So let's wheel in that Trojan horse I was promising you. This was all a problem because of assumptions that we made of our audience. And some of these were just plainly wrong. So, version 2, we replaced all of the puzzles. We just threw them out and replaced them with in-story interactions. We revised the script to be more focused on the important details, and the scares were now mostly atmospherical, and only 2 jump scares remained. All in-show conversation was now also centering about the story and the narrative. And every question that we were now asking our guests was aimed at heart and soul answers. You could answer them even if you didn't pay attention, just by your gut feeling. So there was no longer a way to embarrass yourself because there was no longer a right or wrong. And we changed the marketing again, like a haunted, immersive experience. So we took the threat out of being scared out of the marketing. And the missing ingredients. In scene 2 and 3, we separated the group, and each person was getting a different part of the story, trying to play them against each other. No, don't trust the other person, they're going to do you harm. That was the message. And we introduced a moral choice that had to be made. The choice was help someone to do something bad, and in this case it was the cook. In the beginning, in the bar area, you would be given something to drink or to eat, depending on what room you were in. And later on, the cook reveals to you that the food or drink that you had may or may not have been poisoned by people who came before you. But you don't know. So you cannot change the past. It has already happened. And now he's asking you, do you help me poison that stuff for people who come after you? Do you help me and potentially get out alive of this? Or do you refuse to help me and spend eternity in the hotel? Because the hotel was really the main character. It was the demon. It was not the people inside the attraction. It was the room. And then, depending on what choice they made, we would change the following 2 scenes. And we really made sure they grasped the impact of their decision, depending on what they did. So here's the rather unexpected results. Some guests now exited the attraction, turned around and started clapping, which was, okay, this has never happened before. They started intensely debating whether they did the right thing or not. Also, didn't expect that to happen. And they were getting this story because they felt an emotional impact. We were reaching them from a different angle. Each show was now an emotional roller coaster because of the better hormonal modulation, if you can call it like that. But you know what I mean. And the guests were seemingly taking more with them than what they had thought they were purchasing a ticket for. So the takeaway. What did we do? We listened to our guests. We really did. And sometimes that was painful. It wasn't easy. We now marketed a light story-based immersive attraction, which was non-threatening. We invited people into our story world and pulled them into the narrative and introduced an emotional and moral choice with a very retrospective character. And we delivered on our promise to entertain, which is, hey, shiny new Trojan horse, looks good. But we over-delivered on meaning, because with the horse came an unexpected thing that they did not foresee. So, short definition time, a Trojan horse, according to us, is an element that has the ability to catch guests off guard with something meaningful they weren't expecting. It should only be used with positive intention, at least according to me. It quietly enriches an experience rather than being on the poster. If it were on the poster, it would get a totally different audience, probably. It has room for interpretation and intentionally leaves questions unanswered, and it does not take the moral high ground. I don't think this is useful if it would do that. So, know your audience is one thing. We didn't really think that theme park audiences would be open to things like that we discovered in the end. Your audience may surprise you. Give your audience a chance. Aim for emotional rather than intellectual. Do your marketing right. We didn't in the beginning. Make it personal. Make it about them, not about you. That would be one of the advice I could give. And food for thought. Could this be a way to reach people with messages and meaning, like parts of society that are otherwise not open to these types of questions around society, about behavior. And could this be a way to reach these people and give them something to think about? I don't know. It's a question that I would also hand to you. I think it's at least worth thinking about. So, thank you for listening. That was a tour de force, very quick.
I love the example of the Trojan horse and the moral dilemma. Did you come up with any other, with this particular case study, any other Trojan horse ideas which you thought, we'll just park them for the moment?
We currently are working on an immersive audio attraction that has also like a Trojan horse built in, but only in the story because the attraction is experienced in the complete darkness, so you don't see a lot. But we are working on something for the future that will take this idea hopefully to the next level. And it's going to be mostly the same concept of promising something and then giving something unexpected with that. So we're still in the process of development, so everything's unfinished at this point in time, so we can have a chat about that later maybe. But yes, I would love to evolve that concept and to do more with it in order to not just make entertainment, but make entertainment with meaning.
Hi, for someone who's relatively new in the scare industry and doesn't really know the lingo that well, could you elaborate on serial exposure therapy experience? I feel like I'm
so
outside of that.
Exposure therapy is a common method used by psychologists to get rid of phobias. Like they will expose you in a controlled way to things that you are afraid of, and by slowly ramping up the dosage, you'll get used to it. What we did, because every room in the attraction was supposed to trigger at least 3 different common phobias, it could be that people had a very sweaty hands moment in one and another one and a mental breakdown in the next one, which obviously posed some health and safety risks because you were never sure how your audience would react. Luckily, nothing did happen, but we were well aware that something really bad could have happened, and there's an example from a previous attraction. We had a room that was completely white. Everything was white. It was like a wash salon. And there was one figure in there, one character, completely dressed in white, white hair, white contact lenses. Everything was white, and the room was filled with UV light. So it was glowing in your face. And then there's a group that comes in, and one woman out of that group froze, was no longer able to speak, fell down, and needed to be transported off with the medics. And we didn't do anything. My poor scare actor in that room was like, I didn't do anything. Yeah, I know. So you think you're in control, but you're not. You never look inside the heads of your guests. And we remembered that, and we decided, okay, we can't push it any further because they may have a bad reaction to something in one room, and they may have an additional bad reaction to something in the next room, and that may trigger some really unpleasant experiences for the guests. So that's serial exposure therapy. It's not necessarily a term of the industry, but it was a risk.
Hello, I really like your explanation of how the whole system works. So here's the idea. So if an audience participating in your show, although he didn't follow your guidance, choose the choices that you designed before, but he makes some really interesting decision. And how would you just design it for the following audience? And will you add this kind of creative idea into your following design? Thank you.
We could. In this case, we did not do it because in theme park land, you have very strict capacity rules and guidelines. So we unfortunately did not have the luxury to incorporate unexpected decisions that guests were making into our design, or into the show at that point. But I would love to do exactly that in a future iteration of this concept. That it's more reactive to what people bring in order to give them the element of surprise. So, oh, they're reacting to what I did. Interesting. That I would love that. But again, in LARP land, this is very common. In theme park land, it's difficult to do because every 2 minutes there's going to be the next group in your room. Groom in the room. That would be a different theme. So yeah, totally get the point. I would love to do that, but we weren't able to incorporate that into this particular show. Okay, thank you very much for coming. If you want to talk more, just say hi. Thank you.